Hello and welcome to PocketWatch, the show where we deep dive on some of the best and worst film and TV available to us in the multiverse. My name is Gus Ronald, and today we head to the dark purple side of the moon in episode 3 of Marvel's Loki. As usual, I'm joined by a couple of co-hosts who are here to help me break down the episode and see what makes it tick. First of all, he's a man who can make fireworks with his hand, but it has nothing to do with magic. It's Peter Burns.
Put something in a post.
Yeah, sure. For the podcast.
Yeah.
And he can't sing any Asgardian love songs, but he does enjoy a rousing rendition of Come On Eileen in the karaoke carriage. It's Nick Richardson. You love that song.
Put in Come On Eileen in post.
Yeah. Put something in post. Oh, God, that's terrible. Welcome, both of you. How are we enjoying the show?
That's a broad question.
I know,
but
it's
a very broad question. That's a very broad one. For me, this was, I guess, a slower one again. A nice bit of character development between this new character and the character we've known for a decade and a half. And I would just say that this felt a bit like cheaper BBC TV than I would expect. But not necessarily. I didn't hate it, but it certainly felt like, I don't know. It just doesn't feel like Disney budget to me.
Interesting, Nick. Your one-liner?
Yeah, unfortunately, I agree with Peter Burns. The whole time I was watching this, I was like, "There's some enjoyable stuff here," but I feel like I'm watching people in dress up, putting on a stage play, and there was a real, and I can't put my finger on it, and I'm worried that I'll be really persnickety and judgy this episode. But then we are doing a podcast where we break down scene by scene a TV show, and so if I can't be persnickety at any point now, then when can I be?
Exactly. That is the point of this podcast. That is the point of this show. So I'm very glad that you two feel hopefully the same way that I do as we break down episode 3, which was titled Lamentis. And yeah, it was a bit of an interesting change of scenery for the cast and characters of this show. I'll start by just reading the synopsis, which I feel like Disney got wrong here. The synopsis of this episode was that Loki finds out the variant's plans, but he also has his own that will forever alter both their destinies. I don't think any of that happened in the episode.
They're trapped on a planet that's about to explode, so I guess that's an altered destiny, but that wasn't really his plan.
No, it finds out the variant's plans. This is, of course, Lady Loki, or Sylvie, as she then reveals herself later on. She doesn't ever really get her plans out. I watched the episode twice after reading the synopsis, and I was like, no, this really does not encapsulate the episode at all. So we will go through it.
That is the main thing I am angry about.
Well, it starts me off on an angry note, and I feel like it's just going to get worse from here on out. As usual, this is full of spoilers for episode 3, and of course, everything that's come before. So if you haven't watched this episode or the rest of the series, we do suggest you go back, watch them, and then you can come back here and catch up on all the furious speculating and persnicketyness that will follow, I'm sure. What we'll do is we'll break through the episode scene by scene. And again, you guys have given us your kind of temperature checks in terms of like umming and ahhing. A lot of erring and ahhing, I think, which is how I feel as well in this one. This was a very different episode. And so let's get into it and work out what we liked, if anything, out of it. But of course, I should
start, Angus, for God's sake, start.
I just want to add my temperature check, which is that I hated this episode. I hated it.
Wow.
Yeah, I love this series, and I hated this episode. So, just take that.
I find it funny that you say that this episode feels different when it's episode 3, and the prior 2 episodes have been very different to each other.
Very different,
So it's like, maybe Ep 4 will be something, it'll be a horror film or something, you know? It's like,
sure.
Maybe that's what they're doing with the show, is a different kind of style of thing each time. But
that's true. That's true. But we're allowed to speculate like mad, as this is an ongoing series where we just have one episode at a time. So moving into that episode, the show begins in a flashback sequence of sorts where we see Lady Loki using the enchantment that she has as a power over one of the hunters, who was kidnapped in a previous episode. And we see this nice little scene play out in a bar where she's kind of manipulating that person's mind to find out the answer to the question of how many people are guarding the timekeepers, which then gives us sort of a window into the idea idea that Lady Loki, which I will refer to up until this point until she reveals her name, is hunting down the people in the TVA, but ultimately is trying to get to the Timekeepers in this funny little opener, which, as a side note, I just want to say how great it is when any Marvel TV show or film starts with a cool pop song or a different kind of song under the Marvel logo. They did it in like Iron Man 3 and Guardians of the Galaxy. It sets up like, ooh, this is a different tone and flavor. And then that's just a little side note. What follows is this cute little back and forth scene where we see kind of like the underlying maliciousness of Lady Loki there, which I guess is what her power is every time she touches someone's head. Is that what we think?
My understanding of it, based on how she describes it to Loki later in the episode, is that some people are really easy. Most of the Timekeepers are not particularly easy because their minds are really foggy at the very least, and they're strong-willed.
Well, not the Timekeepers. The Timekeepers are the three.
Sorry, the TVA
beings.
agents. The TVA agents.
Yep.
And that particular TVA agent that she kidnapped in a previous episode, she identified as someone that she could manipulate with a bit of work. And this was one of those times where she's putting in the work to try and manipulate that person, as opposed to it just being a one and done touch like the people in the supermarket before.
Best scene in the episode, in my opinion.
I thought it was really cool.
It had the thing of it's nothing that we haven't seen before. Basically, whenever anyone can manipulate someone's mind, there's always this scene where they think everything is normal. But just it's always creepy to me, that feeling of the person suddenly going, "Hang on, I don't know who you are." And I liked the way that it kept like resetting the restaurant as being a cool little, like, she's just trying to get this information, getting a little further every time. I really liked how this was played out.
It was a dialogue scene as well, which like when I say dialogue scene, it was like a little back and forth of like interesting whimsy dialogue rather than exposition or where are we going? What are you doing? That sort of stuff. So I enjoyed that too in that sense.
I would have loved, and I know this is a pipe dream, stupid thing to say, but I would have loved for the entire episode to have been a friendship relationship story about Sylvie and this TVA agent doing shit. And just like I don't know if you guys have watched Mythic Quest, but they do these breakout episodes mid-season where they follow some different arc, and it's just like a really nice separation from the main arc, and to have that piece of information be something that Sylvie was working on trying to extract for an entire episode would have been a really interesting dynamic to see her at work in a more interesting way, and to see like how far she's willing to go in terms of breaking people down on the inside, because we get a moment of that, like she's trying to confuse this poor woman. Is she a poor woman, or is she evil, or is she being manipulated by the Timekeepers? Whatever. Seeing her like flick through time and keep this woman guessing, and then just because they had to get through this moment quickly, pre-titles, it's like she's just really pushing for that information. Like she's very open about asking for the information as opposed to being subtle, which I think could have been an interesting thing to spread out across a full half hour, 40 minutes or something.
I think you're right in the sense that we've just met this new character, and you're right. Often what you might see in television traditionally is then a step backwards episode to suddenly see all the character or groundwork of who this person or who this character really is, before we then play catch up to that moment where Loki finds her and confronts her, which instead we move straight on to. Sorry, Nick, you were saying?
Oh, no, I was just going to say... and I tend to not want to do too much the sort of like, I wish it was this instead. But what that would have achieved is the idea of like this person who in the previous episode we're supposed to be very scared of and see how powerful they are. This was really the only time where I was like, oh yeah, your power is very scary. And then suddenly in the rest of the episode, it's like they undo everything. The character just turns on a dime and just becomes this sort of like vague, I'm just trying to do this thing that I'm trying to do, and suddenly becomes one of the weakest people in the on the planet, it seems like. So
Well, as I was saying, it's basically that character building takes a sort of back step for the sake of moving the story forward and meeting Loki, which happens when she finds her way through the elevator in the shopping center and then finds her way back to the TVA. she is then on kind of a mission to get to, we're assuming, the Timekeepers, and during that little mission through there finds out that magic doesn't work, which is a nice little reveal of her discovering that. Like, she clearly doesn't know everything. This is a big plan that's been in place, but, still working it out as she goes. We get a little fight scene in the hallway between her and some of the guards that are there, which I must mention, like, the power of their batons, like, leaves no room for error. Like, if you accidentally poked your friend with one of them, they're gone. I guess it's the same as carrying a gun, but it just feels very excessive.
It's not though. It's like, because like a gun, you put a hole in yourself, that's bad, but go to a hospital. As soon as that thing nicks you, you just disintegrate.
Yeah, I was going to say, if I brush up against a gun, I'm fine.
At least a lightsaber,
brush up against this thing.
A lightsaber cauterizes the wound it just made.
This thing's still healing.
This thing just
this is like a virus. It's you get on your foot, it takes you out from the bottom to the top. But we get a nice little fight scene in there that shows that Sylvie, Lady Loki, is a pretty capable fighter. She then makes her way through to wherever she's going at that point before she's confronted by Loki, who's chasing her through the portal, who grabs his weapons, and they have a little fight in the near the door before they're confronted by the judge. I've forgotten the name, Ravenosa. I'll remember it. Yeah. And I've just got to say, this is the start of some of the most sort of panto fight choreography and sort of stage stances and all this kind of stuff. Like, if you watch it back, their fight is just super over the top. It's super rehearsed, which is fun, but it gets worse.
There's a part where they circle each other in the hallway, and a hallway is not a great space to circle each other because you have to direct. And he's got the daggers, and it's like, he walks past her, and I swear to God, at one point he needs to sort of angle the dagger so he doesn't stab her on the way past. I'm like, this is a terrible scenario to get this close to someone who is trying to kill you.
Yeah, it's a little awkward, but it takes us very swiftly in and then out of the TVA as Loki, just before getting attacked, uses the Tempad, which is the device we've seen earlier in the series that they use to transport around time and space. Obviously just hits a button, doesn't really know where he's going. It must have been pre-programmed for the apocalypses that we previously saw were being used to hide in. And the two characters arrive at, or I should say, on a new planet, or a moon in this case, which is a Lamentis one, a moon that is doomed to be destroyed by a colliding planet. And here the two continue their little fist fight, trying to sort of get lines of dialogue out about what's their motive and who's going to kill each other first, all that sort of stuff. But their fight's interrupted by the fact that, this planet or this moon is about to be destroyed as asteroids come raining down. And again, Nick, you're right, claustrophobic in terms of we've just moved from a hallway into a small room where they fight, before running out of the room into another small room. Are we getting the same kind of things, Pete, as episode 1, where we just have to keep returning to small sets?
Yeah, I guess. It's like, it just seems to be I don't know, I assume they're still using the that virtual set technology, which is kind of limiting them to, like, even when they were walking through a lot of the moon territory, the shots can only go on for the length of their stage, and then they cut away, which is the same deal with blue screen and stuff. But it's like, It does feel like they're not getting kind of any chance to do anything on a big scale. Even when it is, there's something about that tech that feels, and I feel the same when I'm watching Mandalorian, that it feels like there's a set looming over the actors, as opposed to it being even them just being composited in front of something. Yeah.
I think as well, and from a story perspective, I liked them landing in this little mining shack thing and it coming through, and she's like, "Where did you take us?" And I was like, "Oh, this is cool." And then they run out, and it's really cool. There's a planet about to crash into a moon. Yeah. There's asteroids or meteorites or debris, whatever you want to call it, like raining down on them. They're sprinting away, and it's like, fuck. And he's like saving her and dragging her, and I'm like, yes, this is so cool. And then they like slide into another room, and I'm like, okay. And then they stop and have this conversation. I'm like, why is this room safer than the other room?
Totally.
Like, why is any? And then we'll see. But the rest of the episode, they just walk slowly across this moon. Yeah. And this is like a small. I guess this is like a small nitpicky thing to say, but it's like you've set up these stakes that this planet's about to be destroyed. The planet's about to be destroyed in 12 hours.
Being on the surface is treacherous.
Exactly. Being on or being anywhere because you were in something before and a meteorite piece like smashed through it. Yeah. So being anywhere is treacherous. And the whole episode is them having a casual, slow stroll while you constantly see debris falling down around them. And they're just like, that was the only point of tension with that in the whole episode, was that first like couple of minutes when they're there. And then it stops being like a villain. And it's like they've moved away from the bad spot. But then anytime there's a shot that's wider than a 2-shot, you see shit flying and hitting the ground constantly. So
totally. I don't think it's a small
thing. Like,
it's not nitpicky at all. It's the first thing that stood out to me. I imagine Pete similar, and like it's one of those devices that should have they should have written in something there to be like, oh, now the asteroid defense shields are over a certain area of the planet, or it was just a large chunk that had fallen off there, and it's not happening or it's happening more often. But it could have used a quick little line or a little device there to cover that up versus exactly what happens, which is the second they move on from there, it just stops being a threat. It's like they walk out of the crater and it's no longer an action scene, which just felt very awkward and very kind of clumsy, I would say, which I feel like that's kind of the word for me that sums up this episode, is just clumsy of how scenes transition, etc.
And because they spend a lot of time talking about how this planet's about to explode, but it never feels like they're in danger from the planet anymore. And it's not until the very end that, again, there's some sort of like real stakes being shown and then taken away from them. But yeah, it's like they spend a lot of time going, we don't have a lot of time, we're going to die here on this planet. It's like, are you? Because that's not what your tone seems to be. You are casually walking literally everywhere. Why are you not running? Hijack that fucking mining truck that you were hiding under at the beginning.
I assumed when they went into that second hut that they were going to go down an elevator and underground or something like that. I was like, okay, there's going to be something here where they're working out clever ways to get across the planet with like the mining equipment that's around. And
just hadn't thought of that. That's a brilliant one. Underground train. That just makes as much sense with less skyboxes. Yeah.
Small confined space. Like even later on, and I know we're jumping ahead. And there's a train in this episode that just very casually weaves its way through, and they're like, they're letting the rich people on. And the rich people are all having cocktails and stuff on the train. And it's like, there's no fucking way that track has survived the entire. Statistically, there's no way that train gets to its end, and everyone's just like literally sitting there.
It's not like a space hover train or anything. Like there's nothing special about it. It's literally on rails.
And you're right, like it's difficult often to watch these kind of shows or movies, Nick, and then say, here's what they could have done. But I feel in this case in particular, as Pete said, like, an underground tunnel would have worked. My version of like those towers that run over it are just like, boom, you see little force fields over the top of it. Like you could have done that in those wide establishing shots. They run into the covering umbrella system that runs over the train. It's like, yeah, I'd believe that in a heartbeat. And I'd be like, that just, I gets rid of that device being, or that, device that they use, which then very quickly they put to the side. So yeah, that's an awkward first step on this journey, which essentially turns into a fetch quest, which, like you mentioned, Pete, with a lot of Mandalorian, I think we've seen these episodes need to sort of take a sidestep and come up with a sort of rather contrived reason to slow down and to stop some of the larger exposition and to basically jog on the spot, which is what this felt like, because basically the TemPad has run out of power, the device they used to transport, and so we then see that the decision is made that the two of them need to work together at least to charge the TemPad back up so they can continue on whatever the main actual story thread of this show is. And it's in that small little scene we also see that, as we mentioned with some of the enchantment before, Sylvie attempts to enchant Loki. He kind of fires back with a little bit of like, I'm too strong, I've got different magic, you've got magic. So I think what's interesting there, at least, or we'll get into it more, is that there's a big question mark over the like, where does she get her power from? Is she another Loki? Exactly how, that's where I think the only interest in these characters for this episode in particular lies. Yeah. We then get a couple of more what I will call clumsy scenes as the two of them then slow walk out of the crater and head to a mining town in what is probably the most useless scene of the whole thing, where they spot a neon sign. Loki says that they could use that to charge it. Sylvie kind of says, sure. And there's a really bad attempt at a kind of like backstab where she's like, give me the TemPad. He's like, no. And they're like, hee, off they go. I don't know. I wish I had a better way to describe that scene, but I really hated it. What do you, like, it's not even a scene worth discussing.
That to me is where I was like... It stood out as like a Doctor Who style writing.
Yes.
Of like, and not that I think Doctor Who within the context of Doctor Who is fine. It's just that this scene in the context of the rest of the show is stood out as being like, oh, that's a weird way to write that interaction. It's a weird way for the characters to be interacting, where they, they're far more aware of each other than just being like paper, like script on paper.
Yeah.
Which I feel Doctor Who is a lot of the time, is like when you're meeting new characters, it's like they're literally just the lines on the page is all that matters about these characters. Whereas these characters should be more aware of each other. And I felt like the fact that they quickly form this after this sequence, it's like there's an allegiance, right? They work out that they're going to be working together for the rest of the episode, which they already did anyway, which is why this scene feels redundant. Is that it just does more work in undoing the magic mystery drive of Sylvie, who's been this character that has outwitted the TVA, who has got this master plan that is going ahead reasonably flawlessly, until she meets Loki in the supermarket last week. And I expect to see someone who is really switched on, not a fool like Loki is a fool, a mischievous fool, but a fool. Like, she, to me, just got lowered straight down to his level, where she's meant to be this superior version of him in order to execute what she's done so far. So I found that like to be just more pulling at the threads of what made this character interesting, scary, and powerful. She just becomes, she's plateaued out at the same level that we know Loki's power is, and that kind of stuff. So,
and we get some more info later on in the show about the fact that about what she's trying to do, or not necessarily what she's trying to do, but the timekeepers aren't necessarily what they say they are, or whatever, and so it's positioning her as less a villain and more someone who, like we spoke about last week, is probably trying to undo something that is bad. But you've taken this character, you've brought her down to this sort of foolish level, and like you said, has executed this huge plan, but like just is happy to be like, give me that thing. No. You got me. And it's like, what is this? Like, you both have magic powers. Loki, which we saw a bit later, can like disguise himself as whoever he wants. No one is trying to trick each other in a way that is not just like, oh, I'm just checking the connections here. Pass me the temp pad. And it's like, even I knew that was not how neon signs work. And I don't know shit about neon signs.
Yeah.
So the way that they're trying to like fool and outwit each other is the most witless version of what it could possibly be. It's the most visually uninteresting version of what it could possibly be as well, because it's constantly them just going, give it to me. No.
Yeah.
Oh, damn, we're going to have to keep walking for it. Give it to me. No. Oh, I thought I had you there. Give it to me. It's like,
especially considering, you're right, these are two, well, at least one and maybe two versions of the smartest, most manipulative, most playing long for like the long game or the long con characters in the Marvel universe. These two should be constantly like Ocean's 11ing each other. Like, you thought I was doing this, but I was doing this. Whereas we get the absolute opposite of that. You're right, which is just this really sloppy kind of back and forth of like, oh yeah, okay, move on. And I would say, like, with for how much I champion Tom Hiddleston playing Loki through his whole career of this, like some of the sort of weirdest performances from him, I think it's him attempting to kind of like stretch his sort of comedy sort of chaps in this, but it was like none of it came off well. It felt very awkward, and then that continued as we see later on onto the train and what we'll talk about later. We do get another really clumsy scene straight after that of when they find this little miner's hut or another little cottage, which I actually really like this scene in theory, which is basically they find an old, a survivor who's hiding out in the hut waiting for the end of the world. Sylvie attempts to just kick the door down and is blasted back in, that's kind of humorous. And then it's like, oh no, Loki's going to use some of his actual, suave manipulation tricks, all that sort of stuff, spies a photo of her and her old husband, transforms into him. And there's this really almost touching scene where he like returns to her like a ghost from the past, which is very quickly seen through, and she blasts him back. Comedy ensues, but it's like it feels like a waste of what could have been a really touching scene where maybe Sylvie sees a side of him and his manipulation or his emotional side that, she wasn't expecting. And instead we get just basically another sort of contrived plot device where she tells them, oh, everyone's leaving on the Ark, this large spaceship, and they're all getting there via the train. Off we go, kind of thing. So
I agree that it was a chance to show that this our Loki is a version of Loki that has spent a lot of time among humans and has developed this idea of like this understanding of how to be empathetic, as a tool, but also has actually made him a better person. And I thought that's where the scene was going. Whereas like, they were setting up a bit of a bit, but I was like, they could have leaned into how this character maybe. I don't. Doesn't matter what the backstory is, but actually, like, consoles this person who is doomed.
Yeah.
And instead they just turned it into a cheap gag.
Yeah.
Which whatever. But I thought it was a good moment, a good opportunity for character development for our Loki that just didn't happen. Which again, it's like these things that you're expecting to happen that don't. It's hard to. You need to judge a thing based on what it is, but. It's hard to not go like, oh, you're so close to something really cool to me.
Yeah, the thing that it is, though, is like a literal god, and which he keeps reminding us of, and this super enchantress, time-traveling, vigilante terrorist being outwitted by a lady in a shack. And not in a sort of like the lady in the shack is a superior person and therefore like, and it was satisfying. It was just like, okay, like
totally.
I guess we got the train information and we'll move on.
I don't think, Pete, you're selling yourself short there in the sense it's like things we would like to see, but hey, that's not what happened. It's like, no, I reckon put a pin in this moment of him possibly having a moment of empathy there, because there are a couple of scenes later on where we kind of get this attempt to show that Loki has a connection to humanity and has some, sympathy for them, which I don't think is justified when these lines or scenes play out later on. So I feel like you're right. This would have been a perfect chance to do that. And instead it's played for laughs, and then even, I know this is petty, but like even clumsily after that, she's like, what do you want? And they go, we want to ask you a question. And then she's like, where is everyone? I'm like, why is that written like that? Why? It's weird. It's like the dialogue's not, after we've come off some of that banter with Mobius and Loki earlier on, I feel like much more fluid, natural writing. This just feels like stage direction. This feels very Doctor Who. This feels... which again, as you said, Pete, that would be fine within the setting of Doctor Who, but like we've got these great Marvel characters, we've got these amazing looking set pieces and stuff like that, so that writing for me just falls flat, I should say, and then pushes us to the next set piece, which I'll charge ahead here and just say they get to the train station where we get this kind of weird look at all the people who are suddenly on the planet who are trying to get their way onto a train that'll take them to the Ark. It's a little Hunger Games-esque. It's like, save us. Why won't they save us? Only the rich are being saved. And there's a little play out there of powers where the two of them are trying to work out what the best way of getting on the train is. Loki decides to wear an awkward fitting costume. Whereas Sylvie decides that she's going to enchant the guards and get them to let them on. I don't know why they're debating who's better at doing this. It felt like another kind of awkward sort of back and forth, a bit of a power struggle between them, which is not necessary. They're working together. I don't know. It was an awkward scene for what was the point of it, I guess, apart from getting them on the train.
It's also, I just think the show seems to be playing the same notes. Every episode is just kind of playing the same notes that it establishes in the first couple of minutes of the episode and then just repeating. And the note here is they're bickering. They're trying to decide who is like the more powerful, and they constantly keep getting foiled. And it's like, it's just, by this point, it's boring to me that you get to the train station. The whole, like, I liked the little, like, he disguises himself as a guard, but as soon as he does that, again, I did just keep thinking of Doctor Who about this idea of just like, oh, we've just got this dumb costume that he's in, and whole, like, he's putting on the voice as the guard. And I think the problem with it is that the character, they just have not nailed what this character is supposed to be tonally. Is he supposed to be an all-powerful god who has been brought down and trying to come back? Is he supposed to be used to be a bad guy and is now like a good guy? Is he supposed to be the bumbling fool? And he just, and I think the reason that the acting from Hiddleston seems a bit weird is he's kind of playing all those notes at different times. And so just depending on what the scene needs is depending the character that we get. And that's what makes it feel much more like an amateur theater production as opposed to a considered piece of art.
You could have said theater production, but you threw in amateur, didn't you?
I'm with Nick, yeah. It felt very amateur. Even to the sense that we had all these weird 80-yard lines of people being like, help us, they're only letting the rich people on the trains. It's like, thank you, villager, yelling exposition from the side. And again, I feel like this was probably a scene where we could have had Loki look around and be really distraught by the fact that all these people are going to die. And while she's rushing onto the train using her quick tricks, he's like, how do we maybe fool them to let everyone on the train or something? Like another moment that was missed, I think, to hint that, as you said, Nick, I feel like the story or the narrative they want to go with Loki here is that he is redeeming himself as a villain to someone who cares about humans or cares about life and being the good guy, essentially. And
which he does mention at one point. There is one line or something where he's like, all these people are going to die. And I was like, oh,
we'll get to that.
This is where we're going. Yeah.
We'll get to that, but again, didn't feel like the groundwork was there, especially considering they just walk onto the train, and instead he's written to play it for laughs by doing his voice of "I am a god," and it's like, I don't know, it feels like Loki's smarter than that, even this version of him. So that's why I guess for me it did feel amateur.
It's that stakes thing again of like there's this amazing set piece of a planet about to crash into this moon that all these people live on. And it's like, it's that thing that Marvel does struggle with, I think, quite a lot of like, why do I give a shit about these people? It's like, it's so ridiculous that it doesn't really matter. Same of Asgard getting destroyed. It's like, yeah, whatever. It's like, it was just a CG set.
Yeah.
But this thing was like, there's an opportunity here for Loki to lean either way, right? Like to stay dark and fall into the doom of it all and go like, rather than going like, that you're right, there's these ADR lines of like, oh, we're not going to get in the train, these people are going to die. It's like, there's no gravity to that either. It's like, he should be, I don't think necessarily he needs to think he can save everything because that's not who he is as a character, but he should be like, he should at least feel the gravity of all these people are going to die.
Totally.
And there's nothing we can do about it. We need to save ourselves. And it's like, treat it the moment with that respect, as opposed to it just being like, again, they're all cardboard CG characters, these people on the planet that are going to get killed in stupid outfits. It's like we're in Looney Tunes all of a sudden.
Yeah. One of them needs to grab him as he walks past and be like, help us on too or something, and he has to be like, troubled. That's it. That's just something to just make him feel like, oh, he's thinking. There's things going on up here. But rather than that, we get this like, as I said, rather clumsy
voice
that he uses to get on the train. We get on the train, which again, more Hunger Games.
One last thing with that. It's both here and in the next scene. Again, very nitpicky. But I was like, no one is calling out the fact that
nitpicky is good.
Nitpicky is very good. No one's calling out the fact that Sylvie's dressed really weird. She's wandering around in like a one-horned helmet thing, and like she looks like a superhero god in this world where everyone else seems to be either broke poor mining town or dressed like a French aristocrat from the sort of like 1400s, and it's like no one is even paying attention to the fact that very clearly two people who have come from a different time have appeared on this planet and are wandering around.
Well, interesting, because that brings up a theory that I want to float a little later on, but which plays into the fact that once they're on the train, they basically just pop down and sit down, have a few drinks, and there's, a bit more character development, I guess you could call it, or just more exposition in the sense that, again, really awkwardly written. I don't want to pick it apart line by line, but it just felt like we've had some really great natural conversations, as I mentioned before, with like some great actors, and this just felt like they just seemed to like scattergun their lines about things. I'm tired. Are you tired? Well, did you miss your mother? Yeah. What is love? Here's a firework. Like it all. That's how that felt to me. Maybe it's written better than that, but watching it, I was like, what is going on with this conversation? It's just this ping-ponging around. It was very, very strange, especially as I mentioned, when they start getting into defining like, well, what's your history? Did you ever love anyone? Yeah, of course. Did you? What is love? Love is hate. Haha. I was like, this is bad. This is not a way that these characters should be revealing this information about each other. They should either be at each other's throats entirely or starting, as I said, to like realize that maybe like trying to outsmart each other. But for me, it felt like neither.
Yeah, they went from bickering and not liking each other to having a sort of 19-year-old at a party D&M where they're like in just the flip of a switch.
Yeah, I just feel like it's also like how they've written this episode in particular, but I feel like it's pretty true of the whole series so far, is that everything feels so compartmentalized, and it's like this is a road trip and they never learn anything on the road trip. They only learn things when they're sitting down talking to each other.
Yeah.
And it's like there's the best road trips are when something happens to someone else in a moment that they're around that reflects on them as people, exactly. And they're able to learn something from that. And they never do that. They only interact with a thing, and then there's a scene change, and then they sit down and talk about something that is completely disconnected from all the other stuff they've been doing. There's no through line through it all. It's just like, here's this scene, here's this scene, here's this scene. Not this is the way that everything has interacted with each other to get them to this point.
Yeah. And for a side quest kind of episode, I'm surprised they're not spending more time talking about how they're going to deal with things like the mission once they get there, how they're going to sneak on board. Like the second that they sit down, they just let the whole thing falls to the wayside. It should be like this. If this episode's going to be about that, make them really focused on that and let every other bit of character development happen in between that conversation. Don't just give them downtime, which, as you said, Pete, especially seated at a bar, was not where I saw this happening. Visually, I feel like this whole episode looked really cool internally in all the sets and all that kind of stuff. We've mentioned some of the kind of wonky outdoor areas, which are clearly using a new little trick, as you said, using that virtual studio, but it does feel like that. It's like this can only be filmed from this angle and blah, blah, blah. But I want to just give a mention to like the lighting and the colors. It's nice to see the show being really bold with that, because that's something I feel complements this character and this world really well. But
particularly because like the TVA is so neutral in a cool way that it shows that the show is able to go like, hey, this is still Marvel and there's color saturation hue sliders over here.
Totally.
They're just able to do interesting, because the universe is still interesting.
Yeah.
The universe is still colorful, and it's just this one unit that we've been following so far.
It could have been a grey moon, with like grey mining shacks, and instead they've gone, balls to the wall with the color and stuff like that, which I like.
But it's also this scene was the moment where I sort of like clocked that everyone's wearing a costume. That when they're sitting down talking, particularly Sylvie, it's one of those things of like, superhero costumes are dumb, but we see them in very cool ways and sort of perfect ways all the time. And so you never really think about the fact that what they're wearing is ridiculous. But when they're sitting in a bar just having a chat, you stare at that broken horn and you're like, it looks like a set. Someone snapped that off and had to do it with a little bit of rubber and plastic, and you're like, yeah, I can see it all. Yeah, and also just the fact of like, I'm just, and maybe this is what they're going for, but getting this feeling of like, you're just a person who's dressed up in this weird outfit and you're having this conversation, but all I'm getting is like, the outfit is like, too much for you. It's kind of like you're just you are literally dressed up in something, and so therefore you're not special. And I think that the thing that this, and as Pete had said last week, I think, or maybe it was the week, but I think it was last week, about the idea of like, you're taking everything about Loki and just like making him an idiot. That's what it feels like it's doing with the idea of these characters constantly in this episode, is like going, not that they're fallible, that they're actually just like have no idea what they're doing, and that they're kind of just like, kind of boring. I kept getting distracted during this because I was like, yeah, you're just people sitting down having this meandering conversation. So,
and especially when you've got characters that have the ability to literally transform their outfits into something, like it could have been a really interesting opportunity for them to have to like blend in with the the bourgeois as kind of like elite by putting themselves in some really elaborate outfits. But in doing that, he could have looked very suave and she could have looked very like stunning, and that could change the way they're looking at each other, because then there's these like little very light touches of kind of like possible, I don't want to say romantic kind of like persuasion, but it's like it's Loki probably falling in love with himself if you really want to get into the deep of part of it. But it's like, you know, there's definitely this kind of, they're defining love, and then, you know, we'll get to the sort of bit where he's drunk afterwards, but like maybe that sometimes can just be a nice way to show characters seeing a human side to each other. And so, you know, you have a chance to do that, Nick, and they don't. They choose to sit her down at the bar in a weird costume, him in another silly costume, and not play with the fact that these characters can be going to weird places in time and space, wearing weird outfits, go crazy with it all. Like, that's kind of the fun thing this series could do. And instead, I could see the wardrobe department just, you know, directly on screen in front of me.
Yeah, like, and again, and not to, even though I'm going to do it, not to do the, like, this is what the episode could have been. But if they are bad people or whatever, and at this point, they think everyone on this planet's going to die anyway, their plan is to not get off this planet and avoid the apocalypse. Their plan is to just transport time out of the planet and get away from the apocalypse happening. So in theory, everyone around them is going to die anyway, so it doesn't matter when they die. Kill a couple who are going to go onto this train, dress up to look like them, change appearance to look like them, and now you have to be a couple on this train, and maybe that couple is meeting friends or whatever. And so therefore you're forcing these characters into pretending to have a different dynamic, through which they will discover, through pretending that they have more in common than they think or something. Just something to force them into a scenario to learn about each other, rather than sit down and have a teenage D&M about it.
Or, I mean, sure, good theory, but what if one character just sleeps and the other has a drink and starts singing? That's one way to do it, which is what happens. Basically, Sylvie has a nap, and she's awoken to Loki singing an Asgardian song and getting the whole bar raveling around him, as there's this sort of strange and, I don't know, kind of nice scene where he's, you know, just throwing caution to the wind. He's drunk, he sings his song, there's a kind of an emotional verse where he kind of looks quite longingly at Sylvie at the end, and then dedicates the song to her in a kind of act of friendship that, again, doesn't feel justified by any of the dialogue or any of the scenes that have come before it. She's
there going, where's it? What happened to your disguise? What happened to your outfit? It's like, woman, look at what you're fucking wearing.
Pretty much,
like,
yeah.
Why is he looks more normal than you do in this scenario. At least he's wearing a tie.
Exactly. And then she confronts him because, again, another very contrived plot device. One man at the end of the song decides to go and give a suspicious look and leave the carriage, to which Sylvie cottons on that maybe they're in a bit of trouble, goes to warn Loki, and her warning is basically, you're causing a ruckus and people are going to get suspicious about us, which, again, Nick, to your point, at that point, if no one's suspicious about these characters, why would you care? A little awkward line here from Tom Hiddleston, as, again, he's playing drunk. He tries to get her to eat some food, says it'll go well with the figgy port, and then says, like, who's got the figgy port? And he turns to no one, and he just kind of talks to the back of two people standing far away from him, which feels like this flat comedy line, which starts to make me wonder, is any of this real? Like, you mentioned things before, like, I'm starting to pull fan theories out of my ass at this point. I'm like, oh, maybe this is all some illusion, because, like, it feels dreamlike at this point, and, like, in the way that a dream is confusing, I would say. So that was just a little line. Yes, Pete?
That's actually not bad. Maybe she has broken into his mind as he's
that was something I started thinking about. I'm like, okay, maybe she's doing the full version of, like, the enchantment from earlier, which is why they show it at the start of the episode, because things are playing out really strangely here. Maybe she's
that would be the worst. Like, don't make me suffer through bad episodes of TV to then go.
I agree.
Oh, it was deliberately bad. It's like, no, fuck you.
I agree.
Because, like,
totally.
my big thing by this point is that the world is ending. Why are people still working a bar on a train?
Yep.
They're not. They're not. There's like 6 hours until the planet hits the moon, and someone's serving drinks. It's like there's no panic, there's no desperation, and
that even if there wasn't getting on that arc as well, like
totally. even if the rich people were cool for some reason, they're like, yeah, we're cool, we got this. There's no reason that Sylvie is chill in this moment, you know, she's got this master plan that is about to unfold. because unravel because of something that this other Loki has done. And it's like, she's just like, oh, I'm just going to sleep for a bit. And it's like, yeah, they're on a train, but it's like, that's the only thing I can do is just wait till the train gets to its destination.
Yeah.
But it's also like, that's just bad writing to put them in that situation when there's these stakes. These stakes should be interesting, and they're not interesting because you eliminate the threat by saying, oh, they just have to sleep for 4 hours.
Yeah,
Well,
and again,
sorry, Nick.
but it's like that thing of going, do something on the train. Like, on the train, you could have, the train is taking the captain of the Ark to there, and you need to get the key from him to get into the Ark. So, like, work your way through the train to get to him to get the thing, rather than, I'm just going to have a nap. And the only reason I'm having a nap is so that Loki can get drunk and sing. Like, as
I mentioned, again, very side questy kind of episode, sort of Mandalorian, but at least Mandalorian were like, well, there are these 6 steps to get to the final goal, and it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. You've got to charm this character to get to this thing, to get this vehicle, to get to there, to get the egg, to go back to there, to get your ship. And it's like, okay, yeah, I can at least see that all as a quest log in a video game. Whereas here, it's like they're playing it scene by scene. They're just making it up as they go, and it feels like that the whole way. Which, again, you're right, Pete, like, have a reason. Oh, sorry, Nick, have a reason to be on the train. Otherwise, just get off the train. Which is fortunately what happens during a fight scene that breaks out due to the fact that man who was suspicious comes back and says they're suspicious. Fight breaks out during this. I don't know.
Why can't Loki just magic tickets?
Yeah, I don't know. He can magic everything else.
Master
Is that what it
illusionist.
was? Like,
He could have done that to get on the train in the first place.
Yeah,
What?
he can only do fireworks. That's the only thing he can do. Is you can't magic up some tickets.
Well, he can't do that. It leads to a fight scene. And again, we've got drunk Loki fighting, which feels kind of clumsy. And that's not before he's then ejected from the train. Sylvie realizes he has the tempad, so has to follow him out there, which is even more frustrating based on the fact that it took them so long to get to this point. They're riding on the plot device to get them to the end goal, and they fall off that. It's like, it just really felt like a sort of kick while we're down, because there's they just awkwardly roll off the train, and maybe that's the device that's used to the plot device, I should say, to break the device, which is, of course, the tempad, which is now broken. It was destroyed as he fell out of the train, and so the two of them can now no longer warp back, so they need to ride the Ark out of there, which fortunately they're just a short expositional stroll from the main city where they can head back.
Which is a redirect is so underwhelming in that it's like, oh, we got to get to the Ark. Oh, we broke the thing. Oh, let's go to the Ark.
Yeah,
it's like
it is
nothing
ridiculous,
changed.
and that's where I totally checked out of this episode of going.
As did I. Yeah.
Oh, you can just walk there. Okay,
and he doesn't even have it as a moment of brilliance.
That actually means
Loki literally says, like, well, we've never been on it, so we could do it. And she's like, I guess. Like, that's just the energy that they deliver, that, like, pivot and acceptance of that decision. It's so strange.
And it is this thing of, like, right, so the train was, like, 5 minutes away from the station because you can walk, and then we see a bit later on as they're walking, and you hear a thing of being like, take off in T-minus 10 minutes, and the Ark is like 4 Ks away from them, and it's like, you need to get there, get through everyone, get on it, take it over. And like,
probably fix why it was going to blow up in the first place, because in theory it never gets away.
And in 10 minutes, it means that in 10 minutes, whatever was going to happen is going to happen in that time or shorter. So all of it is just like, oh God, we're not on the train anymore. That's fine. We'll just walk there. Fuck.
We'll sit down first.
That's actually better, because now you don't need to go through like train security and wait until everyone in front of you stands up on the train and starts getting their luggage down for you to get off. Like this has helped you, for Christ's sake.
Yeah.
Ugh.
But not before, as I said, they sit down and kind of just have a moment of, I don't know, sort of to catch their breath, so to speak. Sylvie kind of has an outburst of anger, which, again, doesn't really serve a purpose. We don't see that she's troubled or that she's, again,
or
unless we're going to come back.
Or that she's powerful. She screams and she gets a little green shit in her hands and it goes, boom. And it's like, scream and have the mountain behind you explode. Like,
totally.
Do something where it's like, oh, you are actually very powerful. No, you're not. You're just this person who...
Yeah, is it frustration that her enchantment just keeps having to change because of how God, I really hope that's the case. I'm going to go out in a hard fan theory and say, like, this whole thing was a dream. And
next
she's
episode,
tired.
Loki's like, I should have known because the green screen wasn't that great.
because she's tired on the train because she gets yelly or she, has a scream when she gets off. It's just her frustrated in what's going on. That's my theory. They walk on through the wasteland or through the lunar sort of landscape to get to the city, to get onto the Ark. And in that, we have that moment you mentioned earlier, Pete, which is we discovered that there's more to the TVA. It's a very quick throwaway line, essentially saying that she was convincing the hunter how to reveal who's guarding the timekeepers. And in explaining how she enchants people, she basically explains that the person who was working there at the TVA was a human, was in fact a variant, as is all the people working at the TVA, which is that's the bombshell of the episode, I think. Which is essentially saying that the TVA isn't populated by people who were word into existence by the timekeepers. They were, in fact, people plucked out of existence or out of, their own lives.
Owen Wilson was a pro jet skier in a former life.
Yeah,
Jesus,
totally.
Pete, you're not far off. You're probably spot on the money there. But that opens the door to what's going to be, I assume, the larger revelations later on. And we finish that scene because, yes, you're right, Nick, the ship decides to leave in 10 minutes. So they put a little, pep behind their step and they start running into the city, which is where we get to my least favorite scene.
Just quickly,
I've seen the internet. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, just quickly on that bombshell reveal, I think is really cool. I think that's exactly what we wanted from this, which is the idea of like the timekeepers are doing something nefarious, and so that felt really good. From a character perspective, that also feels like the time where your two goals are aligning now. Like she has her own reason why she wants to do this, and he wants to stop being under the hand of the timekeepers and get access to the timekeepers and sort of like continue. And we're still not clear what he actually wants to do, but it's clearly like get out of this scenario. This is
he said he wants an audience with the timekeepers a few times. Like, and again, why we're not sure whether to kill them or not.
I mean, more like the end goal thing. Totally. This is the moment where your goals are aligning. So therefore, this is your team up moment. This piece of information is what you could have been talking about on the train that aligns you guys, and you now decide to work together. But it's just this kind of like throwaway, which just gets mentioned and then ignored by them, and it doesn't change the dynamic of him understanding, oh, maybe you're not a bad person, maybe you're not a villain. That realization never actually really happens for him, and so therefore it's totally like a huge bombshell piece of information that does nothing to affect the characters, whereas the opposite is we've had no bombshell everything in this episode, and for some reason the characters are changing regardless. So
we've also had that idea the whole episode that he's had the opportunities to ask Sylvie, what is your mission here? Like, what is your goal? And it is that thing where we're avoiding that conversation because we can't cover that stuff yet, because that needs to be saved for somewhere later on in TV world. And that's frustrating in any form of media, I think, to have that idea that you could quite quickly grab that character and say, why did you try to blow up the supermarket? Why are you sending reset charges around the world? Like, tell me your plan. And right now her plan is just like, I'm being mysterious. And I don't feel convinced by that. It just feels like we're stretching out the reason to talk about that. And I find that very frustrating as well, which is probably underlying my frustration through the whole episode, that you've got the ability to clear up a misunderstanding possibly, or as you say, align yourselves as allies in this case. But
they're the first questions you would ask.
Yeah,
it's like
and she needs a better reason to not tell him. She's not just, I don't want to tell you, or I don't trust you. Like, that's a.
But she doesn't have a reason not to tell him anyway. It just doesn't come up.
Yeah,
she said, I don't trust you, like numerous times. Do we trust each other yet? All this kind of stuff, and it's like, sure, but why would that matter if you still want to kill him eventually? Tell him everything, and then if you're still planning to kill him, those motives.
With the way that she just like clear. Gives that, drops that fact of, oh, they were people. They have a history. They have memories from before they were in the TVA. It's like that to her was like a nothing piece of information because she's so aware of all that, whereas Loki and the audience are not. So it was like this is the kind of information that could have dropped way earlier to make it much more interesting.
Yeah. And I read some reviews and lots of like opinions overnight about this episode, and there were lots of people saying, oh, this is a filler episode and this is boring. And then the response to that was constantly, no, this is a character development episode. And I was like, I love character development episodes. There's some of my favorite episodes in every single TV series is where like two characters like genuinely like change their relationship. I just think this is so poorly done, and I've seen lots of people really go like, "Oh, this is fantastic." I'm just like, no, this is to me. There's nothing here that has spurred these characters on to make any of the choices that they're making. It's all done in the most boring, confusing possible way. So it's like, I just want to be clear that like, I love these kinds of episodes where people walk and talk. You have to have good conversations and good character dynamics to make walk and talk episodes work. And that's why this one doesn't.
Yeah, and there's so many stop and starts. There's so many about to talk about something interesting and the other one shuts it down, or there's a contrived reason to move on. And I think that's what's, as I said, it's a real stumbly, clumsy kind of journey, because we never get really any of that conversation we'd like. Leading into the final scene where they arrive at the capital, the city, whatever you want to call it. And as the two run in, there's kind of a like, do you trust me yet? I guess so. You trust me, sure. And again, very clumsily written, not really sure why they would trust each other at this point, and they haven't shown a reason to which Sylvia proclaims, because this is going to suck. And she's right, because the following scene is a very, very strange attempt to show kind of the destruction, and basically it's a big set piece to finish up, to cap off the episode. Not before Loki proclaims, as he stands atop a piece of wreckage looking at all the people panicking to rush onto the Ark, that they're just going to let these people die, which you mentioned earlier, Nick, is a line that comes out of nowhere for me, I think.
Yeah,
it doesn't feel justified. Why does he care now?
It does make sense why he cares. Even though it makes sense, we know the Loki that we know now probably cares, but this Loki has not gone through the thing in this episode, in previous episodes, to get to that point. It just seems like just so confusing.
But also, like, if we're going to pretend that he cares about these people in his immediate vicinity, then he didn't care any more for the people at the train station that are all getting left to die. Like,
Peter, what about the people in Pompeii? Didn't give a shit about them.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's just like a point. It's just a pointless line. It's like, I understand that he has some separation from this, like emotionally, morally, whatever. Like, I don't think he's not there to save those people. He's there to save himself, and that's fine, because this stuff has already happened. It's like that stuff of not. He's just not messing with the time stream. And it's like, it sucks that people died, but it's like, that's what happened. That's what has to happen. So they're not going to mess with that. It's like, why even labor on that point? I just
totally
go.
And I think the thing of, though I do think there's something interesting in the idea that up until the point where the temp pad breaks, like I said before, their plan is to simply get out of this timeline and not to stop this apocalypse. So therefore, I can understand going like, all these people are going to die, but there's actually literally nothing we can do about this. And so I guess beyond justifies shoveling all those people through a door. So it justifies the idea of like, this has already happened kind of thing. So we're actually just like outside of this and we're trying to get through. Once it becomes we can save ourselves, then I understand the idea of going, oh, actually, we're now choosing to save ourselves and leave these people behind and divert the course of time. But with that, it's like, well, then again, instead of just having the ship blow up, have it like you tried to save people, and by saving those people, it caused the ship to blow up, or something where like this timeline was inevitable no matter what you did here. So you can display some of your humanity in trying to help, but ultimately it still results in the same thing, which is them, like stuck on this planet at the end. It just seems like, he suddenly cares, but there's no further development of that. It's a line, and then let's run.
There's hundreds of other, I think, solutions that they could have put in, and it's very easy to just spout fan theories or suggestions of episode things that could help it. But similarly, I would have loved to see some of the confusion over Loki trying to save people, or a certain person that keeps coming into his radius, and Sylvia having to remind him that they're all going to die anyway. And like, there's whether or not how that plays out, just some conflict there that they have to keep reminding themselves of how strange this situation is, that it has already played out, that they are already dead. I could see a Doctor Who episode handle this better in a way that makes you go, oh my God, I'm really tugging at some heartstrings here, because this child who's come along with for our adventure has to die anyway. or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah,
but it's there is an opportunity for that rather than suddenly now the temp pad is broken and when we run onto this big set piece, I just proclaim that these people are going to die. It just I think
it's because I'm not looking for different plot. I'm looking for you to execute the thing that you're trying to execute well. And so that's every time I'm like, what you could have done is coming from a place of like, you were trying to do this, but you did the worst possible version of what it could be, as opposed to, I'm not happy with the plot of this episode, which I'm actually kind of fine with the plot of this episode. There's not a lot of plot to this episode, but I'm like, okay, cool. Like I'm keen to see how they get away from this scenario next week. But it was just like fucked. Every scene was just like the worst version of what it could have been.
I have a theory about how they get out of here, but I'll share that after we get to it.
Well, please, because I was going to ask Pete, what follows is a bombastic neon, essentially a oneer, as the two attempt to run around the people. How do we get there? We'll go around it. And they run through some large set pieces full of explosions, through fight scenes. There are still guards fighting them.
Not large set pieces. They run through a couple of corridors.
Well, here's what I want to ask Pete. This is an attempt at a oneer, at a bombastic one with a lot of stage direction. How did it sit for you?
Not well. It's like these things need purpose.
Yeah.
Just because you can do a oneer doesn't mean you should. I don't think it captured. All it did to me was go like, this thing is tiny. It's a horseshoe of a city street to this ship. And that's all that exists here. You know, when you think about the classic ones like Spielberg in Jaws, the camera following the car onto the ferry and the thing moving. It's like, that makes this thing feel so huge, right? The camera just doesn't stop. And it's like, and these people, this town is massive and they're traveling across the water. And it's like, there's something really like satisfying about feeling like there's a world beyond the camera, because the camera doesn't seem to have a limitation. Children of Men obviously is another one that people refer to a lot. And it is similar to this in that there's this war in this city and you're just following this tiny little story as the world, you know, that's the opposite effect of making everything feel small with these people while there's something expansive happening around them. And this was just like, we can do it. Why don't we? And it's like, okay, there's that little bit of road, then there's a cafe to get through because there's no road there, and it's like, and then there's like, why weren't there more people around? It's just like, it gave me more questions than answers. And also like the other point of a oneer, and obviously we're attacking this way from more from like a production side as well than but is to go, you're doing something that is like genuinely difficult to execute, and that's why it's impressive. But when it's all green screen, it's like, okay, there were so many points where I saw like Hiddleston react in the way that a director went, and the ship exploded, and he goes, "Look at the moon."
Nick, I was going to say, you could hear the second AD on the side yelling stage directions to everyone, and you're looking up,
all fake,
and the crowd explosion. Now they were all doing it almost too well timed. The camera always had to keep that. No one would move until the camera was ready to go again. Like it was something that pulled me out of the scene entirely.
And this is not going to play for the audio audience at all, but so many times Hiddleston, either when he takes out the daggers or needs to look up at an angle more than 20 degrees, does this.
I'll describe it for the...
We'll describe it, yeah. Nick has stepped away from his monitor.
He jerks
thrown his arm back and his head back simultaneously.
But he's sent his crutch forward and his hat off his head.
Yeah.
Every elaborate jerk action.
He like whips himself back in this way of just like this huge flourish. And when you're doing it in this scenario, it just feels like I could feel the acting from everybody in this fake oneer. And like you said, Pete, but it feels like they actually ran down a street and then turned a tiny corner and then ran back up the other street. And I'm like, well, if this is how big the city is, then...
Yeah, these desperate people in the city thinking to also use that street.
Why a guard is trying to stop them?
That anyone could have accessed is now completely empty. Yeah, it just was like, ugh.
Well, let's round it out with one final, from me at least, theory or thing I would have changed, and I'd like to see what your reaction to this would have been. They get there, why these people are going to die. Sylvie says, this is going to suck. Hold on, it's going to be big. They take one step forward, boom, arc blows up. And they realize they can't get on it anymore. You would have had the rug pulled out from under you. You would have thought you were going to get this big bombastic scene, and then suddenly, one way out of his, is taken away from us. That would have worked for me. I would have been like, I didn't see that coming. That was clever.
And you would have saved like 4 minutes of tape.
That's the thing they need to save. Because obviously after they finally finish this big choreographed scene with a lot of jerking, a lot of whip lashing, and even that fight at the end that was way too choreographed where they both do the same move and then sort of hero pose at the Ark. The Ark is ultimately destroyed by a large asteroid that comes crashing through it. The camera pans around and we get some very somber music as everyone sort of cries out in dismay that their one escape path is out of there. Has gone, and we cut to credits. So it's a bit of a cliffhanger there in terms of how they're going to get off this moon now.
We did actually miss something there, which was Loki has the power to like reverse time or stop a building from falling over.
Yeah, what's that about?
And again, it's like an enormous display of power that has been could have come in handy at any point during this episode.
Reverse me back on the train.
Yeah, or like, and I wasn't quite clear if he was reversing a bit of time or just like lifting it back up and placing it on there. But whatever it was is probably something he could have used against Sylvie at some point and did not.
Yep. Yeah. He also showed off a couple of neon green
line,
Hadoukens.
an ADR line. The ADR line was like, "I'll get this."
Yeah.
Like it's just so weird.
There was some strong
ADR
ADR lines around that action scene of over here, quick, watch out. We're going to and that obviously clearing up or covering the ADR direction. The stage direction of where they needed to be. We got a couple of neon green Hadoukens, which we saw earlier, which Loki clearly has the power to kind of just like fireball people now. Hey, it looks cool, but it's again where is the limitation of what he can and can't do, especially considering he's in an enchanted dream of Sylvie, according to me. This whole episode is a dream or a bit of a nightmare, depending on how you thought of it. But that brings us to the end of episode 3. Does it leave you guys wanting more? Like, was that a cliffhanger that you think leaves you ready to...
I think from like a plot... So let's remove all the awful character development and just put it like onto plot. I'm interested to see how they get off. Like, okay, cool. And the one piece of like plot information that was dropped here is the idea of like the variants, the timekeepers, and all that sort of stuff. That's interesting to me. So I'm still keen to see what happens, but I feel I have a lot less faith in the storytellers that it's going to be executed in a way that feels like any of it makes sense. I'm keen to hear Pete's theory on how they get off the planet, though.
Yeah. So to me, like I like the ending. I hate the way that they got there because it was just like so many steps towards the same goal, which was just that they need to be stranded on this planet in this apocalypse. And to me, their way out is to somehow generate it's their last chance of survival is the TVA. They need Owen Wilson to come and get them. And they need to do something that is going to manipulate this doomed timeline enough to cause a variant spike.
Right.
To reveal where they are to the TVA so that Owen Wilson rocks up and arrests them.
Would saving everyone on the planet be a big enough variant? Like,
it absolutely fucking would be.
Yeah.
So it's like, that's like, to me, within the realms of the lore that exists, they've set up in these first few episodes, is like, okay, cool. That's a cool thing to play with in the Marvel universe of like, how can we do something so disruptive and what could that be? I'm interested to see how, in my opinion, unless it's a dream, there's no other way off other than someone from some other time rocking up to
That's true.
To
and
rescue
also
them.
The only thing that they could do is save everyone. Because as it's been pointing out, anything you do on a doomed timeline doesn't actually affect anything. So
true.
They could go around and kill everybody. It would be like, okay, that's what was supposed to happen anyway. The only thing that they could do is figure out how to save everyone, and that would be, and so that's like a nice character redeeming. Yeah. I like that. I totally like that.
Yeah.
And considering there's only 3 minutes to go now in that countdown, Nick, I'd be interested to see how they manage to squeeze that all into the opening pre-credit sequence next week.
Yeah, Loki's going to climb a building, and then he's going to do this.
And I'll describe
at the planet. At the planet.
Crutch thrust at the planet. And of course, we know now that that's one of his powers, that he's overacting, can send things in reverse. So there we go. We'll have to wait till next week to find out. That's it for this episode of Pocket Watch. Thank you very much for listening, for watching. We'll be back next week to see if the main characters and maybe the scriptwriters can save this show. Because I'm struggling to get back on board, but I do love it. So we'll see where we go from there. Remember, if you did enjoy this show, and you're listening as a podcast, please, we'd greatly appreciate if you could leave us a review. Or better yet, you could recommend this show or any of the other content we make as part of Back Pocket to a friend to watch, to listen to subscribe. All those things that you can do would support us greatly. And you can find all of that by heading to backpocket.gg, where we have links to everything that we make, do, and we hope you enjoy that as well. Guys, thank you so much for joining me again today.
Thank you.
Thank you, host.
Not at all. And let's do this again next week. We'll catch you guys then. Bye-bye.